Sons, throw 87-year-old father into the sea. Your time is up. I want my inheritance. What happened next? Have you ever wondered how far a person would go for money? If you think you know the limits of human greed, get ready to hear the most shocking story I've ever told on this channel. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching this story from, because what you're about to hear today happened in Mexico and shook an entire community. It was a cold March morning in Puerto Escondido, a small coastal town in the state of Oaxaca, when the fisherman José Ramirez set out for his daily routine before dawn. The sea was rough, with higher waves than usual, and José almost decided to turn back home. But something caught his eye, a dark shape floating among the rocks near the shore. Initially, José thought it was just trash washed up by the sea, maybe a plank or a piece of wood. But as he got closer in his small boat, his heart pounded. It was an elderly man, unconscious, with purple lips and a freezing body, but he was still breathing. "My God!" José shouted, struggling to pull the man into his boat. The old man was wearing blue silk pajamas, completely soaked, and his hands were injured, as if he had tried to grab onto something. José rowed desperately back to shore and called for help from the first fisherman he saw. Within minutes, an ambulance was on its way. At Puerto Escondido General Hospital, Nurse Esperanza Morales, a 52-year-old woman known for her dedication to her patients, received the unconscious man. Esperanza had grown up in that town and knew almost every resident. When she saw the old man's face, she recognized him immediately. It was Don Alejandro Vasquez, one of the most respected and prosperous men in the region. Alejandro owned a chain of Mexican craft stores that spread across several cities in the state. At 87, he had built a small commercial empire, always known for his generosity with employees and his passion for local culture. A widower for 5 years, he lived alone in a seaside mansion that was one of the town's unofficial tourist attractions. But what intrigued Esperanza most were the injuries on the old man's hands and arms. They weren't consistent with someone who had accidentally slipped into the sea. They looked like struggle marks, deep scratches that suggested desperation. Besides, how would someone in pajamas have gotten to the rocks so far from the beach? As the doctors worked to stabilize Alejandro, Esperanza noticed him muttering incomprehensible words. She leaned in closer and managed to make out, "Sons, no, please." A shiver ran down her spine. She knew Alejandro's 3 children, Ricardo, Elena, and Miguel, all successful adults, but she also knew their family relationship wasn't the best. Ricardo, the eldest at 55, was a lawyer in Mexico City and always seemed impatient with his father's sentimental nonsense. Elena, 52, had moved to Cancun after getting married and only visited Puerto Escondido on special occasions, always complaining that her father spent too much money on silly things like home renovations and church donations. Miguel, the youngest at 49, lived in town but had serious gambling problems and debts. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button down below because it's just getting started and the twists will leave you speechless. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any real stories like this one. When Alejandro finally opened his eyes several hours later, his first words to Esperanza made her blood run cold. "Nurse, my children, they threw me into the sea. They wanted me to die so they could have everything." Esperanza felt as if the floor had disappeared from under her feet. She looked around to make sure no one had heard and leaned closer to the hospital bed. "Don Alejandro, are you sure about what you're saying? Maybe it's confusion from the trauma." But Alejandro's eyes were clear, focused. He grabbed Esperanza's hand with a surprising strength for someone who had spent hours in the freezing sea. "I know what I'm saying, my dear. They were there last night, all 3 of them, the first time they'd gathered in years. I thought they had finally come to make peace with me." Alejandro began to recount what had happened the night before. He was at home, watching television in the living room, when he heard the gate open. To his surprise and joy, he saw his 3 children walking up the porch. Ricardo was in a suit, straight from the airport. Elena wore an elegant dress and expensive jewelry. Miguel looked nervous, constantly glancing around. "Dad, we need to talk," Ricardo had said, with a serious tone that Alejandro didn't like. "It's about your future and ours." Elena sat in the armchair across from her father and crossed her legs. "Dad, you're 87 years old. It doesn't make sense for you to keep living alone in this huge house, taking care of all these businesses. It's time to pass everything on to us and rest." Miguel remained standing, restless. Alejandro noticed his youngest son was sweating, despite the cool night breeze. "Miguel, are you okay, son?" he asked. "I'm fine, Dad. It's just, well, I have some small debts and—" "Small," Ricardo interrupted. "Miguel owes over 200,000 pesos to loan sharks. Elena lost a fortune on her husband's company stocks, and I have some tax issues that need to be resolved quickly." Alejandro's heart began to race. "You came here for money, after years of not showing your faces?" "It's not just about money, Dad." Elena tried to soften her tone. "It's practical. You sign over the assets to the 3 of us, we'll take care of everything, and you'll go live in a very nice nursing home in Oaxaca. We've already visited it. It's an excellent place." "A nursing home?" Alejandro stood up from his chair, outraged. "You want to put me in a home so you can take everything I've built over 60 years of work?" The argument escalated quickly. Ricardo argued about fiscal responsibility and estate planning. Elena talked about quality of life in old age. Miguel just stood there silently, clearly embarrassed, but he didn't defend his father. "Your time is up, Dad," Ricardo said coldly. "You've lived your life, you've enjoyed it. Now it's our turn. We want our inheritance while we can still enjoy it." Those were the words that broke something inside Alejandro. He looked at the 3 children he had raised with so much love, worked so hard to give them education and opportunities, and saw only greed in their eyes. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "Now, Dad, be reasonable," Elena began. "Get out," Alejandro shouted, pointing to the door. That's when everything changed. Ricardo approached his father with a look Alejandro had never seen on his son before. "Dad, you don't understand. We're not asking. We're informing you of a decision." Miguel finally spoke. "Ricardo, this isn't what we agreed on." "Shut up, Miguel," Elena hissed. "Do you want to solve your debt problems or not?" Esperanza listened to the story in silence, feeling each word like a stab. She had known Alejandro for years, knew he wasn't a confused or delusional man. But could children really be capable of something so monstrous? And then, Don Alejandro. What happened next? The old man's eyes filled with tears. "They dragged me out of the house, my dear. They took me to the rocks on the beach, and they threw me into the sea." Esperanza felt sick imagining the scene. As a nurse, she had seen a lot of cruelty in her life, but this was beyond anything. "Don Alejandro, do you remember any other details? Anything that could help us prove what happened?" Alejandro closed his eyes, straining to remember. Ricardo was holding one of my arms, Elena the other. Miguel was behind, crying, saying it didn't have to be this way. It didn't have to be this way. When we got to the rocks, Elena said, "It'll look like an accident, a confused old man who left the house at dawn and slipped." Ricardo replied, "Perfect. We'll file for the probate tomorrow." "And they really pushed you?" "Ricardo gave me a hard shove. I tried to grab onto the rocks. That's why my hands are so bruised. The water was so cold. I really thought I was going to die. I was getting tossed between the rocks, trying to scream for help, but who would hear me at that hour?" Esperanza knew she had to act, but she also knew it would be the word of a traumatized old man against 3 respected members of society. She needed evidence. "Don Alejandro, do you want me to call the police? Who's going to believe me? They'll say I'm senile, that I made it all up." Alejandro sighed deeply. "Esperanza, do you have children?" "I have 2, sir. A 16-year-old girl and a 14-year-old boy." "Then you understand. The pain of discovering that the people you love most in the world are capable of killing you for money." At that moment, the door to the room opened. It was Dr. Hernandez, the attending physician. "Esperanza, Don Alejandro's children have arrived. They're very worried and want to see him." Esperanza felt Alejandro's blood run cold on the bed. The old man squeezed her hand even tighter. "No! Don't let them in." "Of course we're coming in, Dad." Elena's voice echoed down the hall before she even appeared at the door. "We were desperate. We've been looking for you all morning." Ricardo entered right behind his sister with a perfectly rehearsed expression of concern. "Dad, thank God you're okay. When we saw you weren't home this morning, we were worried sick." Miguel was the last to enter, avoiding direct eye contact with his father. Esperanza carefully watched each of their reactions. Ricardo seemed perfectly calm and controlled. Elena was putting on a theatrical display of concern, but her eyes were calculating. Miguel was visibly nervous, his hands trembling. "How did you end up in the sea, Dad?" Ricardo asked. "The doctors said you were found far from the beach." Alejandro looked at Esperanza with an expression that clearly said, "See." He answered in a weak voice, "I don't remember anything." "Of course, Dad," Elena said with false kindness. The doctor explained that it's normal to have memory lapses after such a trauma. The important thing is that you're okay. Esperanza decided to test their reaction. "It is strange. Don Alejandro was in his pajamas, but he was found quite far from his house. How does someone walk all the way to those rocks?" Ricardo answered without hesitation. "My father has episodes of mental confusion at night. We've had to go looking for him in the middle of the night before. He must have gotten disoriented." "Episodes of confusion?" Esperanza raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know that. Don Alejandro has always seemed very lucid to me." "Nurse," Elena took on a condescending tone, "with all due respect, you don't live with our father every day. We know his state of health better than anyone." Miguel finally spoke, his voice trembling. "The important thing is that Dad is okay now." It was at that moment that Esperanza noticed something that made her swallow hard. On Ricardo's right hand, there were small, fresh scratches, exactly the kind you get when someone fights back, scratching with their nails to defend themselves. If you think this story is incredible, just wait for what's coming next. Things are about to get much more tense. Esperanza tried to maintain her composure as she observed the scratches on Ricardo's hand. She decided to act as if she hadn't noticed anything, but her mind was racing. She needed to find a way to investigate without raising suspicion. "Dr. Hernandez," she said, addressing the doctor, "I need to run some routine tests on Don Alejandro. Perhaps it would be best if the family waited in the waiting room." "Of course," Elena replied promptly. "We'll let Dad rest. We'll be right outside if you need anything." When the 3 of them left, Alejandro sighed in relief. "You saw it, didn't you? The scratches on Ricardo's hand." "Yes, I did, Don Alejandro. I'm going to note everything in his chart and talk to a few people, but for now, I need you to pretend you don't remember anything, okay? It's for your own safety." Esperanza left the room and went straight to talk to José Ramirez, the fisherman who had found Alejandro. José was in the hospital reception, still shaken by the morning's event. "José, I need you to tell me everything in detail. How exactly did you find Don Alejandro?" Doña Esperanza, it was very strange. He was among the rocks at Punta Negra, you know, those big rocks on the north side of the beach. And how do you think he got there? Jose scratched his head. That's what doesn't make sense. To get to those rocks, you have to walk at least a kilometer on the sand, then climb up and down among the rocks. It's a very dangerous path, even for young people. Imagine for an 87-year-old man, especially in the dark. And did you notice anything else strange? Yes. When I pulled him into the boat, I smelled perfume on him. A woman's perfume. I thought it was weird because Don Alejandro has lived alone for years. Esperanza's heart raced. Elena wore a strong, distinctive perfume. Jose, can you go to the police station today and report this to Detective Martinez? It's important that it's on the record. Of course, ma'am. Anything for Don Alejandro. He's always been very good to all of us here. Esperanza returned to the hospital and decided to investigate further. She went to the front desk and asked the secretary about the Vasquez family's visiting hours. Oh, yes. The secretary said they arrived around 9 in the morning, but the strange thing is they already knew about the accident before anyone had even called them. What do you mean? The daughter, Elena, came in saying, "We heard our father had an accident at sea, but I don't remember anyone making any calls to the family yet. Don Alejandro had only woken up a few minutes before." Esperanza felt a chill run down her spine. How did they know about the accident if they were supposedly innocent? She decided to take a walk through town to talk to some people who might have seen or heard something the previous night. Her first stop was at the house of Doña Carmen, one of Alejandro's neighbors who suffered from insomnia and spent her nights on the porch watching the street. "Doña Carmen, did you see any activity at Don Alejandro's house last night?" "Oh, Esperanza, I sure did. Around 10 at night, 3 cars arrived at his house. I recognized Ricardo and Elena. It's been a while since they've been here. The third car was Miguel's." "And then, did they stay long?" "They stayed until almost midnight, but Esperanza, there was a lot of yelling, a lot of arguing. I heard Don Alejandro shouting, 'Get out of my house,' several times." "And did they leave?" "They left, but they came back half an hour later. I saw them walking down the street with Don Alejandro between them. I thought it was strange because he was in his pajamas." Esperanza felt her stomach turn. "Doña Carmen, which way did they go?" "Towards the beach. I thought maybe they were taking Don Alejandro for some fresh air because he seemed a little, how can I put it, like he wasn't walking of his own free will." "Are you sure about what you saw?" "I am, my dear. My eyes still work just fine. And there's one more thing." "What?" "They came back alone, without Don Alejandro." Ricardo was wiping his hands on his shirt, as if he'd gotten them dirty with something. Esperanza now had 3 witnesses: Jose on the strange circumstances of the rescue, the secretary on the prior knowledge of the accident, and Doña Carmen on the events of the previous night. It was time to go to the police. Esperanza hurried to the Puerto Escondido police station, where she found Detective Martinez, a 50-year-old man who knew the town like the back of his hand. She told him the whole story, from Alejandro's testimony to the evidence she had gathered. "Esperanza," the detective said thoughtfully, "this is very serious. Attempted murder of a parent is a heinous crime in Mexico, but we're going to need a lot more evidence to confront the Vasquez family. They have a lot of money and influence." "Detective, I have 3 independent witnesses who confirm parts of the story, and there are the scratches on Ricardo's hand." "Yes, but a good lawyer can explain all that away. I need more solid evidence." Martinez drummed his fingers on the desk. "Here's what I'm going to do. I'll go to Don Alejandro's house to look for physical evidence. You go back to the hospital and keep your eyes wide open. If you notice anything strange, call me immediately." Meanwhile, at the hospital, the 3 siblings were whispering in the waiting room. "Did you see how that nurse was looking at us?" Miguel asked nervously. It was like she suspected something. "Miguel, stop being paranoid," Elena retorted. "She's just a small-town nurse. There's no way she could suspect anything." Ricardo, ever the pragmatist, was more concerned with the legal aspects. "The important thing is that our story is consistent. Dad had an episode of mental confusion, left the house alone, and accidentally fell into the sea. End of story." "But what if he remembers?" Miguel was clearly starting to panic. "What if he tells someone what really happened? Who's going to believe him?" Elena shrugged. "A traumatized 87-year-old man against 3 respectable children? Please." "Besides," Ricardo lowered his voice even more, "if he starts talking too much, we can always claim senile dementia and file for a legal conservatorship. Then we'll be in charge of all his assets." What they didn't know was that Esperanza had returned and was hiding behind a pillar in the hospital, listening to every word. She discreetly took out her phone and started recording the conversation. "Ricardo, are you sure we didn't leave any evidence?" Elena asked. "I'm sure. I cleaned everything. The only marks he might have are from the rocks he tried to grab. And that just confirms our story of an accident. I can't stop thinking about his face when he realized what we were going to do." Miguel seemed on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He looked at us as if he was seeing monsters. "Miguel!" Elena scolded him harshly. "Get a grip. It was necessary. He was never going to give us the money willingly, and we couldn't wait for him to die naturally. That could take years." "Elena's right," Ricardo agreed. "We did what had to be done. Now we just have to stay calm and wait for everything to blow over." Esperanza had recorded enough evidence to incriminate all 3 of them. She quietly left the hospital and immediately called Detective Martinez. "Detective, I got a recording of the 3 of them confessing to everything." "Excellent. I'm at Don Alejandro's house now. I found some interesting things here too. There are clear signs of a struggle in the living room. Furniture out of place, a broken vase they tried to hide behind the sofa, and footprints of 3 different people in the sand, in the backyard, heading towards the beach." "Detective, they're planning to claim senile dementia if Don Alejandro starts talking." "Then we'll act fast. I'm on my way to the hospital with a team. We're going to arrest all 3 of them right now." Esperanza ran back to Alejandro's room. "Don Alejandro, the police are coming to arrest your children. We have enough evidence." The old man began to cry, but this time they were tears of relief. "Esperanza, my dear, you saved my life. How can I ever thank you? You don't need to thank me for anything, Don Alejandro. I just did what was right." At that moment, they heard loud voices coming from the hallway. It was Detective Martinez and his team arriving to make the arrests. "Ricardo Vasquez, Elena Vasquez, Miguel Vasquez, you are under arrest for attempted aggravated murder." The commotion in the hospital was immediate. Elena screamed, "This is absurd! You can't arrest us without proof." Ricardo tried to maintain his professional composure. "Detective, this is harassment. We will sue the police department." Miguel simply collapsed into a chair, putting his hands over his face. "We have plenty of proof," Detective Martinez declared, holding up Esperanza's recorder, "including a recorded confession from the 3 of you just a few minutes ago." When Elena heard her own voice coming from the device saying it was necessary, he was never going to give us the money willingly, her mask of innocence finally shattered. "That nurse, she recorded us. That's illegal," Ricardo protested. "A recording without consent can't be used as evidence." "Yes, it can." "Ricardo," the detective replied calmly, "when a crime is in progress or there's a spontaneous confession in a public place, the recording is completely legal." Miguel, who had remained silent, finally broke. "I didn't want to. I swear I didn't want to do this to Dad. They made me do it." "Miguel, shut up," Elena yelled, but it was too late. "No, Elena, I can't take it anymore." Miguel stood up, sobbing. "Detective, I'll tell you everything. It was all Ricardo and Elena's idea. They said if I didn't help, they'd let the loan sharks kill me over my debts. Ricardo tried to interrupt his brother, but the detective stopped him. Go on, Miguel. We want to hear your side. Ricardo planned everything down to the last detail. He said it would be easy, that it would look like an accident, that no one would suspect. Elena convinced Dad to let us in by saying we wanted to make peace. Miguel wiped his nose on the back of his hand. When we got there, we tried to convince him to sign over the assets, but he refused. That's when. When what, Miguel? Ricardo said we couldn't leave without resolving the situation, that our financial problems were too serious to wait for him to die naturally. Elena agreed, said it was the only solution. Elena tried one last gamble. Detective, my brother is clearly mentally disturbed. You can't take what he's saying seriously. But Detective Martinez had seen enough. The physical evidence at the house, the witness testimonies, the recorded confession, and now Miguel's detailed account. There was no doubt left. Esperanza, he called to the nurse, I need you to come to the station today to give your formal statement, and Don Alejandro too, when the doctors clear him. Of course, Detective. We'll do whatever is necessary. As the three siblings were led away in handcuffs, hospital staff and patients watched the scene in shock. No one could believe that children would be capable of trying to kill their own father for money. In his room, Alejandro watched everything from the window. Esperanza approached him. How are you feeling, Don Alejandro? Sad, my dear. Very sad, but also relieved. For years I've wondered where I went wrong as a father, what I did wrong for my children to be so cold. Now I understand that some people simply choose the path of greed. Don Alejandro, would you like me to call a relative or a friend? The old man smiled for the first time since he had arrived at the hospital. You know, Esperanza, I have a niece who lives in Guadalajara, Carmen, the daughter of my sister who died 10 years ago. She was always so kind to me, but I grew distant after my children started complaining that I paid too much attention to distant relatives. Could you possibly call her for me? Of course, Don Alejandro. What's her number? 2 hours later, Carmen arrived at the hospital, a 45-year-old teacher with a kind face and eyes full of tears. Uncle Alejandro, when I heard what happened, I got on the first bus here. The reunion between them was emotional. Alejandro finally had someone in his family who truly cared about him. But the story still had one last surprise that no one saw coming. 3 days later, after Alejandro had been discharged and was recovering at Carmen's house in Puerto Escondido, Detective Martinez showed up with some surprising news. Don Alejandro, during our investigation, we discovered something very interesting about your children's finances. What is it, Detective? Ricardo doesn't just have tax issues, as he claimed. He embezzled over 2 million pesos from clients at his law firm and is being investigated by the public prosecutor's office. Elena lost her house in Cancun because of her husband's gambling debts. They're practically bankrupt. And Miguel owes the loan sharks much more than he admitted. It's over 500 zern pesos. Carmen, who was present, was shocked. Uncle, they really were desperate. But there's more, the detective continued. By investigating their bank records, we discovered that the three of them met several times over the last 2 months to plan this. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It was premeditated. Alejandro sighed deeply. Detective, I have a question. Is it possible for them to be convicted? Don Alejandro, with all the evidence we have, the recorded confession, Miguel's testimony, the witnesses, the physical evidence, they could get 15 to 30 years in prison each. Attempted aggravated murder of a parent is an extremely serious crime. Alejandro was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, Detective, I want to talk to them. Uncle, are you sure? Carmen asked, concerned. I'm sure, my dear. They need to hear some things from me. At the Oaxaca prison, Alejandro met with his 3 children in a visiting room. Miguel was crying his eyes out. Elena maintained a defiant expression. Ricardo remained silent. "Did you come to ask for my forgiveness?" Alejandro asked. Miguel was the first to speak. "Dad, forgive me. I didn't want to. I swear I didn't. I was scared, desperate." Elena interrupted him. "Dad, we're not criminals. We just made a difficult decision in an impossible situation." Ricardo finally spoke. "Dad, if you had helped us when we asked, none of this would have happened." Alejandro looked at each of his children with a serene expression. "Do you know what the saddest part of all this is? It's not that you tried to kill me. It's that you never, not once, asked if I was okay, if I needed anything, if I was happy or lonely." "Dad." Miguel tried to say something. "Let me finish, Miguel. For years you only came to me when you needed money. You never cared about my loneliness after your mother died. You were never interested in my businesses, my dreams, my memories. To you, I was just a source of income." Elena rolled her eyes. "Dad, don't be dramatic now. Elena, you're 52 years old, and you still don't understand that money doesn't buy happiness. Ricardo, you're a lawyer. You should know there are legal ways to solve financial problems. And Miguel." Alejandro looked at his youngest son with sadness. "Miguel, you were always the most sensitive one. What happened to that loving boy I used to know?" "Life happened, Dad," Miguel answered between sobs. "No, son. Choices happened. Life gives us options, and you chose greed." Alejandro stood up to leave. "I forgive you, but I never want to see you again. Carmen will take care of me now. She understands what real family means." 6 months later, Ricardo, Elena, and Miguel were each sentenced to 20 years in prison. Alejandro donated half of his fortune to charities and left the other half to Carmen and her children. Today, at 88 years old, he lives happily surrounded by people who truly love him. Alejandro's story teaches us that family is not just defined by blood, but by love, respect, and mutual care, and that it's never too late to start over when you have genuine people by your side. If this story touched your heart, leave a like here and subscribe to the channel. Share this with anyone who needs to appreciate their family more. And let me know in the comments, have you ever experienced a family disappointment? How did you overcome it? Next week, I'll tell the story of a woman who discovered her husband had faked his own death. What she did when he showed up alive 5 years later will leave you speechless. Don't miss it.